You can tell her anything. She's a real good listener. You can tell her anything.
Yo, what's up? It's your girl, Father Longlegs. You know me, Daddy T. This is You Can Tell Me Anything, the podcast where I have comedians and comedian friends confess something they want to get off their chest. My guest today is a good friend who I adore. She actually helped start the legacy of Comedy Quarantine and has now continued the torch with self-care comedy. Honestly, don't know how she does it. Continues to run these Zoom shows, which has been a lighthouse for comedians through the pandemic. She produces shows under the Naked Comedy moniker. It's Sam Varela. What's up?
Hello. Hi, friend.
How are you? I should have asked you go by Samantha on interviews, but I feel like we all call you Sam. But
Yeah, no, I prefer Sam.
I feel like that's the thing. Like with comedy names, you get so used to seeing the like comedy name. It's just easy to always call the full name. But then I'm like, sometimes I had a friend who was a b-boy in college, and then like everyone called like his b-boy name was Suitcase. And then one time we ran into a friend while we were out eating. I was like, "This is Suitcase," and my friend was like, "What?" I'm like, "Oh, that's not. Yeah, you're right." He's like, "That's not how I introduce myself to people." I'm like, "Okay, you're right."
I wish I had a cool name like that.
I know. I missed the b-girl b-boy train when middle school, like when it was cool, and now it's too late to get the strength back. But I wish I had like tried. But this isn't about me. This is about you. So to get to know you better, for the audience, I like to ask my guests for a good confession. That's just like a humble brag, something positive to start on. Is there something good you want to confess?
Well, you kind of confessed it for me. I was going to say that I've been doing Zoom shows for 2 years, and I guess the confession behind that is that I do it for my mental health as much as for everybody else's.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly been. I love how it became like this like example of just like how like there's like what do you call it, the zeitgeist or the group effort. The closest thing I can put to like decentralized planning where it's like a bunch of little efforts to put together and like some big efforts obviously, but kind of because I remember when the first Comedy Quarantine was just a one-off, and then sort of like having interest with you and Babs wanting to continue it, it just became this bigger thing. And I think I really have you to thank for that. Yeah, that's awesome.
Our first year was definitely, I mean, now self-care comedy, the second iteration of the now weekly show, is definitely still just about like community and coming together, and we have a great audience that's always there, and just having like a laugh in the middle of the week. But definitely our first year was wild in comparison.
Yeah.
We did the show daily through a lot of drama.
Gosh, that's right. From the protest too,
drama.
I remember. Yeah, there were some shows that were just like straight up group therapy, just like let's just talk, and because we weren't seeing people, or the people we were seeing were like it was like crowds, and then all of a sudden it was like isolation. So
and fighting Instagram live tech issues.
Yes. Oh my God, I forgot about that.
I love self-care comedy, and it's definitely still like, it's a weekly show. There's a lot going on, but Comedy Quarantine will always be its own specific, beautiful, like trauma bond show.
Oh my God, I know. It's like this little time capsule. Well, for people who want to watch or who haven't watched self-care, I definitely encourage you guys to do it. You can do it anywhere in the world. It's on Zoom, and there is a little community and audience members that come back all the time, which I love.
Every Tuesday.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of talking about self-care. This podcast I started because I started going to therapy later, and I found how comforting it was to just be able to like talk honestly, like just like talk about things that I'd kept in. So I like to ask my guests like what your experience with therapy is, or like how you do self-care, which I'm sure you know the answer to because you guys asked that on your show. But whatever you're willing to share of like what's your like process for sort of getting through the hard times. Do you have a confidant that you talk to, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, you think I know self-care at this point, but it's definitely one of the things that's harder for me. I am definitely, I guess, like type A, go as much as possible. But I guess my biggest self-care has been like trying to let go of that somewhat, trying to take things at the pace that I can actually do and not what I feel like society's pressuring me to do. Um,
Where does
but
that come from, the pressure? Just like industry, or is it like growing up you were like an overachiever?
I think a lot of things. I think definitely, you know, I didn't have as strict parents as some of my um, friends did. I don't know how to. I don't want to be canceled, but I grew up with a lot of Asian friends, so we have a lot of similar tiger mom type
Hmm.
vibes.
As soon
My
as you
mom,
said my friends, I was like thinking Asian parents, and I'm like, oh yeah, yeah. I guess I would have paused before saying that now, but
yeah,
I remember saying that a lot in middle and high school, just like, oh, I have Asian parents, which is
yeah.
a funny thing to say because duh, but
It's I wish there was a better way to say it, but it's just
yeah.
such a clear picture of like what I grew up around. And I feel like my mom, she was much more passive aggressive, but I feel like she let the other moms do some of that kind of parenting. So I was definitely under pressure to get, A's and A's.
Asian, yep. I was like Asian. It's funny
Did you
now
ever?
thinking about that because it's really the jokes people make. We just kept making the jokes while we were in it, and then now
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, but we didn't break out of it. Like, why
Yeah.
didn't the jokes the truth didn't get through? That people are like, a B is an Asian F, but it's like, that's how I felt,
No,
and
that was our reality.
it didn't hit until I was an adult. That's like, no, a B is a B. Like, why did I still see it that? Like, I was proud of it being an Asian F, being like,
Yeah.
it's not. There's so many letters. Like A is not. It's not A or
Yeah.
nothing. It's
Yeah. What is it like Talladega Nights, Ricky Bobby, you're first or last, and then when his dad is sober, he's like first or last, like that doesn't make any sense. There's second, there's third, there's
yeah.
fourth. Yeah, no, definitely that and like yeah, I think just yeah, achieving was definitely my love language as a kid. So,
Oh,
I think there's been a lot to outgrow of that as an adult where there's no one pressuring me anymore. But I guess luckily it did give me a good work ethic. I don't know, like do you find yourself doing that trying to like find the
justify
good
it.
in it? Yeah.
Totally. Well, I have to say you're holding Eddie, your dog, who's
Yeah.
adorable, and I also have Wushu on my lap, and so
Aw.
that is a great self-care thing.
Yeah.
But
I
yeah.
did get I got him the January of 2020. This is our
Oh.
year of not today, but
Oh,
it's basically our year
anniversary.
anniversary.
Oh, he's
Oh
so
my
cute.
god. He's
He's
so
so
cute.
cute.
He's not used
Um,
to me not cuddling him
I
for an
know.
hour in the morning.
He's so cute, but I also know you say like he's like mean to not people who aren't you. So I'm like, oh, that sweet angel face. I'm like, I just want to hug you, and I know
It's
you
such a
won't hug
taunt.
me
I
back.
just started getting to know my neighbor and he's getting a little better, but we still have to talk through a fence and every once in a while he'll still go off and go crazy like he forgot that someone he doesn't
Aw.
know is here.
It's so cute. Well, like, yeah, to respond to your question, I do that sometimes. I've gotten better at it now, realizing life doesn't have to be like this binary, like good or bad. But I do think I relate to that, especially in my 20s, having to not wanting to feel shame about certain things like that I didn't like about, how my parents disciplined me, but then also being very defensive about it when like outsiders wanted to criticize. And what I realize now is that's true in every culture, right? Like, even like, white, like whatever, like the what do you call it? The empower, what's that? Oh, wow, I'm losing my vocabulary. The non-oppressive, like the people who are in power, the majority. That's
Yeah.
in like white majority households. There's still things like that where you're proud of parts and then not proud of parts, and we feel like if we're not on the side of like a fight, that we can't just be in it. And so yeah, I definitely relate to that, and I realize now it's less about being like, is it good or bad to be in a strict Asian household, and more like, hey, here's the good parts, here's the bad parts, and here's all the friends who think differently, and let's figure out how to raise our children in the future with all the good parts and less of the
Yeah.
bad parts.
Yeah. No, I mean, right now I am in therapy. I've been in and out of therapy throughout my life. I have fired a lot of therapists. I do believe
You
in it, but
fired?
I
Oh,
do
I've
believe
definitely
in
heard some of
therapy,
these stories.
but
Yes. Oh man.
I do
What are some of the more like the quick versions of why you fired? a therapist?
Well, a lot of times I just fired them because at some point in the healing process, it seemed like they were trying to take me on a route that didn't feel
Mm.
authentically like what I wanted to get going towards. But also more like tangible reasons. One of my therapists later became the therapist for the Vanderpump Rules kids, so I feel like that was a good
How
dodge.
did you know that? Oh, were they
Well,
on the
yeah,
show?
she was on the show
Oh my God.
multiple
Yeah.
times. She was Jackson Brittany's
Wow. That's
confidant.
so funny.
Yeah, and then another one of my therapists was good. It just didn't end up working out, but I feel like I knew from the beginning it wouldn't work out because he was one of those guys that had like the really bad plastic surgery from like the 90s where and like didn't acknowledge like I feel like it's fine if you have it, but you do have to acknowledge it if you're going to be a sane person talking to somebody. Uh it's weird when you can cry and they can't kind of thing.
Uh-huh. Interesting. Yeah, I mean it is about finding the right fit. Like I was trying a new one and like I just the vibe wasn't there. Like
Yeah.
I could probably break it down into something more specific, but it just felt like it was not like she said anything specifically wrong, but there was a couple moments where I felt like she was talking down to me, and no matter how much, like I did bring it up at the end, and she kind of I was like, "Oh, like I prefer to work as a team, but I'm willing to keep trying." But what I kind of realized, like even based on her response, was like she saw herself as like she's probably younger and newer. She saw herself as like I'm here to change you versus like I'm here to work with you. And some people need that. Some people are very far away from like knowing what to do at all and want that like savior feeling. Whereas I get very triggered by someone being like, I know what's good for you. Because I'm like, you probably do, but like it's not a contest. Like you're not, it's not you versus me. Let's
Yeah,
solve
therapy
this
is very
puzzle
delicate.
together. Yeah.
It's a very delicate relationship. And the reason I brought it up was because I'm working with a childhood trauma therapist. Nothing, and like it's taken a long time for me to even
Mm,
recognize that I basically just had like emotional neglect,
mm,
which for a long time it took me a long time to like recognize that that is something that can have an impact. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't
yeah.
feel like for a long time it was
Complex
always like
trauma, right? Like, see,
yeah, like
yeah.
for a long time it was just like that's not trauma. Like I wasn't hit, I wasn't anything, blah blah blah. So it's taking me a long time to even think of it as trauma, which
Hmm.
trauma is just something that has, festered and affected
It's
you
like
for
physical, but I
yeah,
totally understand. Yeah.
yeah,
Wanting to
but
not break that illusion.
yeah, and now we're at the point where I kind of like you were saying, getting defensive. Like my therapist is, I don't feel anger a lot, so she's
Hmm.
trying to work on that. And I've lately noticed that I get angry sometimes when she does say like, "Oh yeah, it's sad that like it's sad that you didn't have this as a kid
Mm,
or whatever." And it's like we still have to talk about it to
yeah.
figure out what that means. But yeah, like the weird defensiveness of like, wait, why am I defending? Who am I defending right now? No one's here, it's just me.
Well, it's the feel. I mean, man, my psychiatrist recommended this book called Radical Awakening, which I'm not done with yet, but so far it's already really good. But like she talks about how, because she's a psychiatrist who wrote it and an immigrant, and she talks about how like you protect yourself like these are things that you've done to protect yourself from feeling things growing up because it
Yeah.
helps you, so it's not stupid to have that reaction of like I don't want to feel that because it actually got you here. But now that you're safe and an adult and you can parent yourself, it's like time to break down those walls. That's the hard part, because the part about where you're like, oh, I have to acknowledge that some things can be better now, but I can't change what happened. So you have to both at the same time accept the truth and the past while also working on a better future, which it does require feeling a little bit of like sadness for what you didn't have. And
Yeah.
I hate that too. I'm always like, no, I mean, I still talk to my parents. I have worked really hard to like keep that relationship, but I know people who went through similar things and decided not to talk to them, and I also totally respect that. And for me, it's like that was the path I chose because I wasn't ready to just like, you know, totally turn my back on it. But for me, it's like I'm building something with who they are now, not who they were before.
Yeah, I definitely feel like I Well, my mom doesn't talk to me. That's been for many years, but I'm very much a person that like rationalizes, like empathizes, like everything that has to do with other people's emotions and not
Mm,
me. And I definitely think, again, it's like the different families you come from. Like my mom's family, they, kicked out their brother when he was a kid.
mm,
Like they're from a family that can shut
mm.
off relationships. So I, in myself, try to work on, I have that tendency too if somebody like really wrongs me, but I'm trying to work on not having such a closed door thing. But I'm actually really excited that I'm feeling these emotions that I don't understand because I feel like that's the first time that's happened in therapy, and like that kind of feels like the point, right? Like you want to get to the point where you don't actually understand what's going on. That probably is a good sign.
Yeah, no, it is. It's like you're hiking and you found a new path, but it's like, oh,
Yeah.
this might be hard. It's like, take your time.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. We're gonna take a quick break. When we get back, we'll get your confession. And we're back. Sam, the time has come. Is there anything you would like to tell me?
I can't remember if I mentioned it already, but I am a newly diagnosed ADHD person.
Oh, okay. I was like, HD, that's a new one. High definition ADHD.
High definition.
Okay, well, we were speaking about recording a bit about medication, but I don't think we've talked about this, and I actually think this is really interesting for this pod because I've discussed like my journey to getting the treatment and diagnosis during the course of recording this pod. So yeah, I'd
Oh,
love to hear your experience. Whatever you want to share. How recent is this? Like very, very recent?
it's pretty recent. It's as of I think this is as of maybe October of last year.
Okay.
Yeah, I forgot we're in a new year now, but yeah,
Oh
I think
yeah,
about October
whatever.
of last year. But yeah, basically this started in 2020, about August. The medical system, it took like a year and a
Mm,
half to even get the test. I am uh my test taker said that I am mild, but definitely have some ADHD, hiccups, as you would say. Like,
hmm.
and yeah, I have recently in the last, I think we're getting on the 3 month mark, but have started taking Adderall, which has been very life changing. I still take a small dose. I'm not sure if I want to take more, but
Mm.
it is definitely interesting to realize that my brain just needed a little bit of meth to function correctly.
Well, but that's I mean, yeah, I go back and forth with my psychiatrist so much about this because I'm like, you hear so many jokes about Adderall being abused and like real life people abusing it, but
Actually,
the
I
rea
had the opposite. My interpretation is that like it has made me rethink the meth epidemic. Like you always think of
oh,
like meth
interesting.
heads, meth mouth, like there's abuse and
Well, maybe some people
negligence and
need it.
stuff.
You think?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
realistically, I'm on Medi-Cal. If I ever make even $1 more than what would allow me to get on Medi-Cal, I wouldn't be able to afford healthcare. And like,
Wait, but it's not meth. I mean, it's not literally
it's
meth.
it's
But
not
I
literally
think
meth,
what you're saying
but
is
yeah,
like there are some people who can't get the resources and will find other ways, which I
yeah,
totally agree with.
yeah,
And it does like it's like you can't drinking alcohol doesn't make you an alcoholic, but somehow yeah, anybody who does any drug, especially if they're like on the streets, to the wealthy class always assumes they're drug addicts, which it's like
yeah.
if
It's
you
like
were living in the cold and had like it's like you do what you need to do.
yeah.
Um,
It's definitely
but
a privilege revelation, you know what I
yeah.
mean?
Well, yeah, my point bringing that up wasn't to say that it was, but it was that I had like my own not shame, I guess. I maybe like yeah, maybe like uh what's the word? Yeah, I guess shame about it in the sense that like I was like how it would be perceived because, people might be like, "Oh, are you abusing it or are you just doing it cuz, whatever, like, study drug." And when I talked to my psychiatrist, she was like, "Well, like anything can be abused and the difference is like or do you have a diagnosis and if you're using it for the thing, that's literally what it's for."
Yeah.
And yeah, but it's definitely like an interesting thing because Adderall is such a like charged
Hmm.
like recreational drug, I guess, when people bring
Yeah.
it up, which is the opposite of my experience with it. Because if you have ADHD, which you do now, and you had, but now and you're
Yeah.
getting treated, that it's like the opposite of going on a party. When you actually get treated, you finally feel more normal and like
Yeah.
not
Well,
normal,
actually,
but like regulated. Like you're able to
yeah.
stabilize, you
Well,
know?
that was part of the reason I was very okay with medication. I know that's like a sticky subject for a lot of people when
Mm-hmm.
they get diagnosed, but you know, I had done Adderall before, maybe once, maybe twice, recreationally, and same with you know, cocaine. I've done that once or twice. Those drugs, I have never felt in a quote unquote drug manner. Every
Yeah,
time I've
you don't
taken them,
feel
I
high.
just am like, I think I just had coffee. Is everybody just like, is everybody feeling this just caffeinated? Like, I
Yeah.
don't know what the high is of those drugs. And Teresa knows I'm a big pothead. I'm very big advocate for pot as a medical, um, you know, a medical
Mm-hmm.
usage thing for pain, for
Great
mental
plant.
illness,
Yeah.
stuff like that. But yeah, Adderall and stuff just doesn't work with my brain that way. It works in a way, like you're saying, that just kind of makes it function quote unquote correctly, you know, whatever, a better manageable brain.
Yeah, that's how I describe to my friends when they're like on coke. Well, I mean, not my friend. All my friends do coke. No, I'm just kidding. Like when I've gone out with people, I should probably say when I've gone out with people in my 20s, back in the day, it's been a long time, and you know everyone's doing coke. Before I was really aware that that's what everyone is doing. I like that energy because they finally matched how I was on a day-to-day basis, and then like I'd find out that someone's like talking a lot to me because they just did a line. I'm like, aw, like I thought we were connecting.
Yeah. The world has catch up to us.
I know. Well, what made you? Because I mean, as like this is a common thing now. More adults are realizing that they can like have control of their own health and like really be the captains of their, you know, like not just healthcare but like their wellness. What made you, as like an adult, want to get the diagnosis or like want to get tested? Like I'm sure you already
Yeah.
knew you had it before the official diagnosis, but what kind of
Yeah.
prompted that?
I mean, honestly, it's not, uh, it's, it was Instagram. A
Okay.
lot of,
Yeah, there's a lot
I
of
started
TikToks telling you
I
too. Like,
started
yeah.
I started seeing on Instagram some of those like, do these symptoms, you know, resonate
Mm.
with you? Like, did you know this is part of ADHD? And for me, some of the biggest ones were I've had you know, disordered eating disorder most of my
Mm-hmm.
life, and have not found you know, a lot of, like, talking to dietitians, talking to people,
Mm-hmm.
it just didn't seem like they were understanding what was disordered about my eating. And
Mm.
then I found a ADHD focused nutritionist pointing out some of the uh, dysregulated eating that can come due to ADHD, and I was like, oh,
Mm.
this is like, these are the key, you know, eating for dopamine hits, eating for,
Mm-hmm.
you know, what is it, like a sensory overload or needing certain
Yeah.
sensory stuff. Like, it was like, oh, this is all, like, this is what I mean when I tell people I'm like picky but not picky. And like that kind of opened the door into seeing a lot more of like um the other symptoms that I didn't realize were symptoms. You know, I just thought was like, oh, this is
Yeah.
just how my brain is.
No,
uh,
that's really cool because I think the stereotype growing up with ADHD was that it was just an attention thing. And
mhm,
that's why for so long I didn't realize the emotional parts. And once you
mhm,
start seeing the connections, it's like so obvious. And it oftentimes is comorbid with complex trauma. And
yeah,
it's this like, because it's harder to regulate because in the past, in order to get to that stable day to day, you had to like kind of have sporadic moments of dopamine, you know? And
yeah,
so now as an adult, you'll, not you, but like people with ADHD often will not be able to maintain the steady flow of like the, you know, dopamine throughout the day. And
yeah.
I
And
didn't
like,
know the eating stuff for a while, but I see on TikTok, like people are like, do you crave bread randomly, munch on chocolate? I mean, these are things that a lot of people do, but in comorbidity with all the other things, I'm like, I, that's right. Since I've been treating my ADHD, all these like weird habits I used to have, like having like 3 beverages, which I still sometimes do, but like leaving them all over the house. I'm
yeah.
like, I didn't know that was an ADHD thing.
Yeah. I mean, simply, I can go to one room. I live in a one bedroom, but I can
Hmm.
go to one room to the other and not forget why I went into that room now. Like, that's a
Yeah.
simple goal that I have achieved.
Oh, that's so exciting. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the last, like the 3 months of, because I that's around the time when it really starts like you see the changes, right? Do you
Yeah.
feel like there's things where you had maybe like a hunch that I was ADHD, but now you're like, whoa, like my life is different.
Well, I definitely, well, for me, the Adderall medication, at first I was trying to just take it like on days where I thought I had a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
But then I spoke to another friend who has ADHD, and they were like, because the doctors are like, it gets out of your system in 12 hours, there's no reason, you can stop it whenever you want, blah, blah, blah. But then a friend was like, try taking it every day. It does, feel like it has kind of a cumulative
Mm-hmm.
effect. And so I've started trying to do that. It does depend on when I wake up, since it is like a stimulant that can keep you up at night. Though I was telling Teresa pre-show that I've always had a like I sleep too much issue, so I'm not as worried about that. But yeah, it's been very interesting to like I said, go to one room or another and remember my thoughts. I still keep a to-do list to keep track of stuff, but it's easier to go from that list to doing it. Obviously, there's still some days where it's tricky, but I'm not quite ready to raise my dose, even though I'm allowed
Mm-hmm.
to. But yeah, it's just been interesting to um, there was also a big aspect that, like I said, is still sometimes there, but of the what's it called where you're frozen. The
Oh yeah, you
executive
get paralyzed, flight or freeze, right? Flight or
Yeah,
freeze.
but the executive dysfunction was a
Mm.
big reason that I wanted to get diagnosed and try medication. Because a lot of times, yeah, I'll look at my to-do list and just for whatever reason, certain things will seem insurmountable, and then I'll just be
Mm.
frozen, unable to do it. And now, if I do that, it's more of a choice.
Uh-huh.
It's more of allowing myself to have that part of my brain activated. But yeah, I think after taking it for a while, it is very, I don't know, it is just weird to feel like my brain can work the way it did in my 20s, which
Mm-hmm.
for a while I had just come to peace that it wasn't going to, that was just part of aging. So it's nice to like be able to focus and be able to like not be overwhelmed by, you know, small doable things on a list.
Yeah, I think when you said cumulative, that really struck a nerve because, like, just to emphasize for folks who, we're not medical professionals, like, go, if you think you have ADHD, like, definitely go talk to a professional. But we can share our personal experiences and hopefully it helps, if you have similar ones. But, disclaimer there because I
Yeah.
know sensitive subject. But the reason I like how you talked about it being cumulative was because I feel like there's oh my god, I'm getting ADHD brain. No, because like for me, like I think so many things, it's not that it's like a magic pill, right? It's not like the secret solution that totally changes everything, right? I like
Yeah.
that you described that. You still have to make those changes in your life. It just makes it easier to do that. It's
Yeah.
like if you were driving a car that kept leaking gas. This is how my psychiatrist described it to me. It's like the dopamine. It's like you've filled up your car with gas and you get on the highway and then the engine drops out and you're like, what? So it's like, yeah, you can't drive like that. And you can't even
Yeah.
think about getting good at driving like that because you're so focused on, will my car break down?
Yeah.
So it's a little more like the Adderall helps you put gas in the car, but you still
Yeah.
have to like drive the car and you can now work on getting better at driving the car. So I think it's not like suddenly you're a race car driver and like you said, you might still have moments where you're like procrastinating, like that's normal, healthy. People don't always want to do things, and sometimes there is that part of your brain that's like, well, I'll just have to work on this ethic part, or
Yeah.
I actually want to take a break. But it's a little easier than just like, oh, I can't even like fold my sheets. Like, there's like a difference between
Yeah.
like, I don't want to do this work and like, oh, I haven't touched my laundry in like a month or whatever. And it's like, why
Yeah.
not? Yeah.
It's also been helpful because I am separately, but I guess comorbidity is everything. But I am a disabled person with physical issues, and so it's also been helpful for me to recognize like what I absolutely like just physically cannot do.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm gonna get a housekeeper for some of the stuff that I just physically can't. Like I broke a glass last night and was exhausted after cleaning it up. Like little things in life, like that was something that maybe before I would have been like, what's wrong with me, blah blah, and now it's like, no,
Mm.
that I have a working brain, I know that this is just something that physically is difficult for me, and that's not something to feel ashamed of. That's something to like get help with. But also, like you were saying with the car analogy, I feel like another way of looking at it would also be like an automatic car versus a manual car,
Hmm.
because I think a big thing too is like that I identified with when I was, thinking maybe I have ADHD, was how people described like everything is not just overwhelming, but it's like you see everything as so many more steps than somebody else would. Like every
Yeah.
task you see, like the checklist is like I have to get off the couch, I have to get some water, I have to get my phone to my computer, like all this stuff that like is I guess automatic for most people,
Hmm.
but for me is like I manually have to think about each tiny step, and that is a lot better when I'm medicated, and that's definitely been um yeah, I guess like a validating thing to have the medicine help with.
It is very validating. And it's validating for yourself too, because I'm sure, I mean, it definitely makes sense to like go to a medical professional, but sometimes you just like have a gut feeling and you do want to like obviously get second opinions. But I totally understand that like the validation, because a lot of ADHD untreated, you often feel like you're being gaslit because
Hmm.
things are harder. And sometimes people are like, why is this hard for you? But also part of ADHD is having sometimes hyperproductivity when it's not
Hmm.
treated too. So it's like, sometimes I'll get something done really quickly and then it'll take me so long, and then people won't see there's a problem because there's an average, right? They're like, oh, well, like you seem to be functioning. And I'm like, but it's
Yeah, well,
hard.
yeah, and plus, like, as women identified by the medical community as women,
Yeah.
we're also, I have comorbidities of, depression, anxiety, and I had a lot of pushback from my psychiatrist of like, I think it's just symptoms of that. And it really took some pushing. It took a year
Hmm.
just to get him to refer me to the people that would do the testing. And, there's also masking. Like, I think
Yeah.
I've been masking since childhood.
Hmm.
And being an emotion, I'm a very emotionally sensitive person to others, which just makes the masking that much better. And so there's also, I mean, with my injuries and other disabilities, like I've had a lifetime of pushing the medical community to investigate things with my body
Mm.
that I felt were necessary.
That's
And it
so
was
frustrating.
yeah, I mean, I'm thankful I had those experiences with other things earlier in life to, be able to get this ADHD diagnosis in a year and a half. Like that was
Mm.
because I pushed so hard. And so, yeah, I mean, you need the doctors to confirm it. You need the doctors to get medicine. It's nothing you should go outside the system um, to achieve. But you yeah, like do some of your own research. If stuff is really connecting with you in a way that it never did before, like trust that and push it. The worst that can happen is that you take the test and you don't have it, and then you can figure out what else may be causing things. But you
Yeah,
know,
it's sort of the taking the first step part. I think that that is the key, because it's like we always think, not we, but I guess I have thought this, and people sometimes will, the idea of like finding a magic fix for everything, right? Like if I just do this, like we just had a new year, right? The New Year's resolution complex of like this time I'll do this. But your life is not one moment, right? It's all these little moments. So it's like if the more little steps you take, the closer you get. I like what you said about like hiring the housekeeper, because I think that's a big part that people don't talk about, like the way to get help. Like so much of, and this doesn't just apply to ADHD, but just like in general, the idea of like wanting to improve things and knowing the difference between like what you can do and what you can ask for help. And asking for help sometimes is even harder for people,
oh
myself
yeah, I
included.
cannot ask for help at all.
Hmm.
Like the most I can do is these like service industry help. Like if there's some sort of
Hmm.
relationship that's based on yeah, somebody doing a job and paying it, that is a lot easier for me to comprehend than like, God
No, but
forbid I
that's
would
what
ever
I
call a
mean,
friend.
because that's what I mean. Like the idea of like, well, what do I need, instead of like, well, what is everyone else doing? Because
Yeah.
like I had that moment in 2020 when I was looking kind of, I was going through like a really, I mean, it sounds funny now and I'm laughing because I can tell I'm judging myself, which I shouldn't do. And I'm already judging myself, so I'll just say it. But I like wanted to hire a live-in assistant, like because I was having like panic attacks and falling downstairs. And I was like, this sounds like a job like that I would be looking for when I'm like in my, late life, like 80s, 90s. But the reality was I wasn't dealing with it well on my own. And it turned out that it was maybe more of a temporary thing. I was like really going through some PTSD. But what helped me get through it was taking that step. Like I actually was like looking for an assistant, and like I ended up just having a roommate because I was like, actually having someone around is just enough. Like just little things like, oh, can you change the light bulb? And then I wasn't like full time, like please nurse me. But I wanted also to have that fair relationship. So at first I was like, maybe I could work this out where it's like I'm hiring someone. And then it turned out, oh, pivot, that's not what I needed. But I had to be willing to make that silly mistake of, I mean, I wouldn't call it a mistake, but being like, let me make a big swing. Let me have someone take care of me 24/7. It's like,
go through the
not.
process of it. Just give it a thought, give it a chance.
Yeah.
It is weird how, I don't know if that's ADHD or something else, but it is crazy how much just being in the presence of somebody else can change the way that you function.
Yeah, I mean, we were all like going, like, because now we're a little more used to isolation, but I think as a world, pretty unprecedented, the emotional, roller coaster everyone is going through at the same time almost. Like that probably compounded a bit too. And yeah.
I mean, I have said this from the beginning, that this 2020 and the COVID virus is like, oh, this is why I was emotionally neglected, to prepare for this moment.
I know, like all of us like with comorbidities thriving, just like solving all our trauma in quarantine. I mean, not to put it lightly, but like, yeah, I do think there's some of us who were closer to the rock bottom to begin with, had to start climbing first. And we got out of that hole, and it was hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but
I mean, I'm still definitely indulging my isolationist tendencies in a way that I will probably need to deal with soon. But in the meantime, it's how I'm able to do all the stuff I do is because I'm fine being alone.
Mm-hmm. Well, you don't have to judge yourself. I mean, I think that too in comedy in the industry, like we're bringing it back to you saying like having the pressure of being overachieving. I had that feeling the other day, like, oh, I'm not doing enough shows and mics, and then a little relief being like, well, now we can't again. And the reality is like, there is no one way to do it. Like if you look at, 10 people whose careers you want to emulate, I'm sure every single one of those top 10 has like something that the other one doesn't. And in fact, like one might be like they came out with one movie and then 10 years later another good one. You're like, that's great. And another one that's like, I'm doing something every day. I'm on Twitter every day. And there's just no one way, which makes me realize like if isolation is your norm to get through it, then let it be. Like, I mean, there are like famous movie directors who like will only talk to like 2 people or whatever, So it's like, maybe that's actually the key is to give yourself what you need and not what you think others will.
I should just start thinking of myself as a recluse.
Think of yourself as someone who will give yourself what you, and you know the difference too, because I'll have times where I'm like, oh, I need this alone time. And then other times where I'm like, I'm being a little selfish. Like I actually could push myself out of my comfort zone. And so that's that hard part. But if you don't treat the part where you're constantly uncomfortable, then you can never know when it's okay to push yourself, Yeah. I love that. Well, I'm so happy for this new development in your life, especially like personally, as it's something I've gone through and I know how much it helped me just be able to like actually address, like I'm able to address my relationships, in my family and in love and all that. So not to say it was all ADHD, but it definitely cleared away some of the cobwebs so that I could actually deal with what I needed to.
Yeah.
Well, I have a quick game to end on. Are you down?
Yeah.
Okay. This is really related to, I mean, I wrote this game inspired by your show Self-Care Comedy, but I feel like it's related to all the stuff we're talking about. It's called Self-Care or Punishment. So as we've learned from toxic masculinity, binary thinking, J.K. Rowling's turf wars, anything can be a prison if we chain our minds to it. For example, I love a casual 7 p.m. edible before bed, but throw in a new Weeknd album to listen to at 9 p.m. and suddenly my night of self-care becomes a purgatory of feelings. That is what happened last night. What I'm saying is self-care can look a lot like punishment depending on the eyes of the beholder. So you run a show called Self-Care Comedy. I thought this would be a fun game. The rules are simple. I'll read a tip, and this is from I pulled a couple like articles online. So these are all like, direct sources. And you have to tell me if it's a self-care tip or if it's a punishment. So some of these are articles that's like how to punish your kids, things like that.
Oh, no.
And some are how to do self-care.
Okay.
Don't worry, it won't get too dark. Okay, so here's the first one. Here's the tip, or is this self-care tip or punishment? Stash the cookie jar.
Do you have any clarification? Does that mean
I will elaborate once you guess.
Okay.
Because otherwise I feel like it gives it away.
I guess I feel like it's a punishment. I feel like it's a punishment my mom did.
But this is word for word. Mostly, I mean, a lot of these would be like this where it could go both ways. But word for word, okay, self-care from goodhousekeeping.com. It says, stash the cookie jar and set out a giant fruit bowl instead. You'll be more likely to reach for an apple or a banana. Here's the next one. Okay, early bedtime or extra nap.
I guess self-care?
You would think, and it is also self-care, but this is a punishment from BetterHelp.com and an article about how to use positive punishments. Early bedtime or extra nap time is an effective positive punishment for younger children. This is not my words, it's the article. Children do not want to sleep when they could play or be active, so being forced to sleep is a great deterrent to bad behavior.
No.
Also, most small children act out more when they're tired. By making them get extra sleep, you may be curing the root of the problem.
Or you may be encouraging their sleep disorder.
I know, Jesus. Oh, now I'm realizing where all my ADHD comes from. Okay, here's the next one. Know when not to respond.
Self-care.
It is a good self-care tip, but you're incorrect. This is a punishment from healthychildren.org in an article called How to Discipline Your Child. As long as your child isn't doing something dangerous and gets plenty of attention for good behavior, ignoring bad behavior can be an effective way of stopping it. Ignoring bad behavior can also teach children natural consequences of their actions. For example, if your child keeps dropping cookies on purpose, you will soon have no more cookies left to eat. I mean, I guess that makes sense.
Unless you do 5-second rule.
Right. And then they get sick, you have to take them to the hospital and pay for that bill. So that's me, my dog, when he eats things. I'm like, no. Okay, confront your negativity on paper.
Self-care?
Yes, I think the your gives it away. Self-care from Women's Health Mag. But this says, write down the lies, the negative self-talk, self-doubt, and then combat that with what you know to be true, what you're capable of. Putting that on paper helps to acknowledge the negative while not letting it overtake the positives in your life. I do like that tip because sometimes when a thought runs over and over in my head, I'm like, let me just put it down. And then it's so stupid. Like, it's like as soon as, or I'll have an insecurity and I'm like, oh, I think my boyfriend's like ignoring me. And then I'm just like, well, just ask him. Because if he was, you should break up. You know what I mean? And it's like, as soon as I ask him, I'm like, oh, I know you're not. And then it dispels the thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Have a family dinner.
I don't think that can be a punishment. Well, maybe it could. I don't know.
No, you're right. It's self-care.
Yeah.
I could be a punishment, but no, that depends on your family. It says, this is from Women's Health magazine. Having a set meal time where you sit with your family, significant other, or just alone to eat and enjoy your meal can be a really nice way to connect with your loved ones or yourself. Yeah. It's true. It is also good positive punishment in the sense of like, not punishment, but getting your kids to like connect. So I actually would put that under good parenting. All right, here's the final one. Remove social situations.
I guess self-care. No.
It would be good self-care, but this is a punishment from News Folks under an article called Creative Punishments for Teens. If your child tends to get in trouble when they spend time with a certain friend, you will want to keep stronger tabs, or a group of acquaintances. You want to keep stronger tabs on who they're hanging out with and what they're doing together. Moreover, if your child is punished, you can restrict their ability to see friends for a certain period of time. I mean, I do self-care by removing myself from social situations. I mean,
to be fair, everything on this list that was a good parenting or a parenting thing is something that I feel like in my life has attributed to my childhood trauma.
Yeah. Generally speaking, don't punish your kids. Punishment just doesn't work.
No, yeah, I mean, I think in general, like, no parent can be perfect, and there's always some sort of, I mean, honestly, I think that's part of parenting is like fucking up your kid some way, and you just hope you do it in a better way than others. But yeah, it's just interesting how like everything can be different depending on the people involved and how they interact.
Well, it really makes me realize like that the reason punishment doesn't work is because it's the framing. Because so many of these things in the right light is just us trying to discipline ourselves, right? Self-care can also be looked as in trying to improve your life or make, be the best version of yourself. And that's what parents want for their kids, but they have to want it. Like the kids have to want to be that. And that's the hard part. The hard part is like the parenting of like not taking the easy route, punishing, but making your kids want to be a better version of themselves.
Yeah, and you have to get to know them to figure out what's going to be right for them.
Yeah, I love that insight.
Shout out to the parents that are trying to do it right.
That's a great place to end. Sam, is there anything you would like to plug or tell our listeners about?
Sure. Like Teresa said, I produce shows under Naked Comedy. As of now, in the COVID crisis, most of my shows are on Zoom, so they're accessible to anyone and everyone. You can find it at nakedcomedy.org, at Naked Comedy on Instagram, at naked_comedy on Twitter. The continuation of Comedy Quarantine is Self-Care Comedy, which is every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern on Zoom with a variety of great hosts. And Teresa and the Comedy Quarantine crew definitely show up every once in a while. And yeah, I would just plug being safe and, looking at, not to take it dark at the end, but, looking at COVID as a community crisis and really acting in the best interest of our community and not just your own personal needs.
Yeah, that's well said. And you can follow this podcast at Tell Me Anything Pod. Follow me at Teresa Lee on Instagram and at Larissa T on Twitter. Thank you for coming on the show, Sam.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to You Can Tell Me Anything. You Can Tell Me Anything is a comedic podcast created and produced by Teresa Lee on the Hoo Ha Ha Podcast Network. The Hoo Ha Ha team is Ashley McAtee, Audrey Povar, Maggie Wheat-Austin, Cardi Assad, and Stephanie Bignot. The theme song for this podcast was created by Cody Johnston. The outro music was written by Shipwrecked Sailor. And the Hoo Ha Ha app can be found in the Apple Store to stream your favorite comedy series and laugh out loud podcasts by the funniest woman in comedy. To contact this podcast specifically, you can email tellmeanythingpod@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram at tellmeanythingpod. Thank you.